So welcome back, everyone. As we talk about the feminine in Judaism, we obviously can't ignore the three very important mitzvot that were given specifically to Jewish women. And you may know them, some of you may not, but women have three mitzvot. The first one is separating challah, which means when you're making challah, you're taking a portion of the dough and you're dedicating it to Hashem. You say a prayer over it and you separate it. The second is we have lighting Shabbat candles, which is all about bringing light and peace and presence into the home, which is our temple, and really observing family purity called Taharat Hamishpacha. And this is all about honoring the cycles of intimacy and renewal between man and woman. And these mitzvot are not random. Together, they basically symbolize the three pillars of feminine spiritual power. The first is nourishment of the body, which represents by Challah. The second is the illumination of the soul and spirituality, which is the candles. And the third is sanctification of cycles and of connection and of intimacy, which is family purity. In the previous modules, we basically explored the metastructures of the feminine in Kabbalah. We also spoke about it in the context of Jewish history and within the cycles of the calendar. And now I want to basically bring it all together. And this episode is basically about synthesizing the main feminine qualities that we've been learning and really showing how they can guide us on our day-to-day lives. So the first thing that we spoke about was the ebb and flow, which is the crux of the idea of the cycle. So life moves in cycles. We have the expansion, we have contraction, we have times where we feel full and amazing, and times where we feel low and empty. And really the feminine comes to teach us to welcome every single phase and not to fear and not to reject any part of us. And really our work is integrating every single part of us, every version of ourselves, and really finding wholeness in the ebb and flow of our inner worlds. The second is the power of rest. And the Jewish feminine way of seeing it is that rest isn't weakness. It's about renewal. We have Shabbat, we have Shemitah, we have the Jubilee. All of these teach us that true growth happens when we have a pause, and that rest is a blessing and it's a catapult to push us even further. And basically science confirms now what the Torah has said all along, and that is that rest is basically a time on a neural level for our bodies and our brains to integrate wisdom, and it basically fuels creativity. And all in all, it just prepares us and catapults us into what's next. So we had the ebb and flow, and we spoke about rest, and now we'll speak about surrender and trust. The third is learning to surrender and learning to trust and have emunah. The feminine knows that control is just an illusion, and that actually our real strength comes from a place that is beyond mind, beyond the rational. It is from a place of heart, it is from a place of emunah, when we completely trust ourselves and are able to surrender into the hands of God. And then we can walk through this world with softness and with grace, instead of with tension and with fear. We touched on this idea a little bit before of the light and vessel, the ol, the kli. And the feminine is known as the kli, the vessel. And like Bina, if we're talking in Kabbalistic terms, like Bina receives from Chokhmah, the feminine receives light and basically expands it into form. When you're receptive, it's not a passive surrender. It's really an art that is sacred, and it allows us to make space and create space for blessings to come in. Even if you think about how babies come into the world, there is a vessel. That vessel is the womb, and the womb receives the seed, which is the power of potential, and it takes it, it transforms it, and it births new life. So that is the feminine state of receptivity. And in Hebrew, the word for womb is actually rechem, which is the root of the word rachamim, which means compassion. And we know that Hashem is a kel rachman, a compassionate God. And this comes from God's attributes that are more on the feminine side, mothering, nourishing, nurturing. And this is the ultimate compassion that we can learn from Hashem. So if we try and live in the image of the Creator and God being the infinite, we know that the feminine mindset basically rejects scarcity. And why does it reject scarcity? Because God is infinite. And that means that there's more than enough for everyone. And that means that this life isn't a zero-sum game. For me to win, it doesn't mean that you have to lose. When I realize that I am here to fulfill my role and you're here to fulfill your role, and the more that I can rise within myself, And the more that I make space for you to rise, we both rise together. So a lot of the times, especially between women, sometimes there can be maybe cattiness or competition. The feminine doesn't compete, it collaborates. And when we rise together, we each fulfill our own unique role. And this creates a collective abundance and radiance that we can only achieve together. The feminine also lives through the body, through sensation, intuition, cycles. And it's this generative birthing that doesn't just birth children, but it also births idea and art and transformation. And this embodiment is basically a deep presence that allows us to bring our creativity and birth it into reality. So these principles that we discussed are not abstract. They really are tools for living. When we honor the ebb and flow, when we embrace our wholeness, when there is no part of us cells that we reject, when we know how to rest, when we renew, when we learn how to deeply surrender, when we learn how to found like peace, when we learn to receive, when we become vessels for blessings, when we learn to nurture, and when we learn to be in our most creative states of being, when we learn how to think in abundance, this is the feminine way of becoming, not by forcing, not by chasing, but by aligning with the cycles of life and trusting the process and eventually shining together. So the three women's mitzvot are not commandments, they are doorways. Challah teaches us trust and surrender, knowing that our sustenance comes from Hashem. Our candles teach us rest and renewal, connecting to the magic of Shabbat. And family purity teaches us the sacredness of cycles. And when we live them out, they naturally expand into these feminine principles of becoming. And this is the deeper wisdom of the feminine in Judaism. And it may take us a lifetime to embody all of these principles, but they can be guiding lights for us to live more embodied lives and really become our full selves.